Hi friends, welcome to this session of solar project financing. In today's session, we are going to discuss about one very important document. This is known as Power Purchase Agreement. In short term, it is known as PPA. So if the PPA is signed for a project, then it becomes a real project. And if you want to get financing done, then PPA is the major document which is required by any banks or financial institute. So today we are going to discuss the PPA term sheet. The PPA term sheet is the summary of key points of a solar power purchase agreement. The full PPA is about 30-page document. However, the PPA summary or PPA term sheet is hardly a two-page document. So we are going to discuss the PPA term sheet here. I will let you a copy of the full PPA, which you can download from our website, so that you can, if you may wish to read the full PPA, the detailed terms are already available. But we will explain everything to you through the PPA term sheet. We are sharing the screen, so that I am going to share my screen, which shows you the different terms, and we will explain one by one. Now, this PPA can be used for any rooftop project or ground-mounted project. We will discuss how things change in different conditions. So, in the first section, you only have to define that who are the two parties signing the power purchase agreement. On one side, there is a solar developer who is signing the power purchase agreement, and on the other side, there is a off-taker. Off-taker can be a discom or a utility. The off-taker can also be a consumer for a rooftop commercial industrial project, wherein you are selling power to a industry and they are your off-taker. The off-taker can be through an open access arrangement, through which the buyer is located 50 kilometers away from the plant and they are trying to buy the electricity from you. So the off-taker is signing the power purchase agreement with the developer. In my sheet, you see, we have not named the off-taker, but the developer, we have just given the name as if the first green is developing this project. Now, the first part is here you have to define what is the project capacity. It can be 1 megawatt, 2 megawatt, or a 500 kilowatt, or a 500 megawatt power project. So capacity is to be defined either in DC or in AC or in both. Generally, the solar capacities are defined in DC-AC ratio also. So you can define like a 5 megawatt AC and 6 megawatt DC project. So this is where you can define your project capacity. The location also to be specified in the PPA, which is the location you want to install the plant. The next part is the how much you are going to get the expected roof area or the ground area. So whatever is your area requirement, you have to specify that as part of the shadow-free area requirement. Especially this shadow-free area is more important in case of the rooftop project. In ground-mounted project, this is not that much important because you have a lot of land and where the shadow analysis is to be done by the developer only, and it is his duty to remove all the shadow elements. A brief explanation of the system design is also required, wherein you are explaining that what type of system it is, whether it is a 5 megawatt AC capacity and a 6 megawatt DC capacity. Is it having a inverter, central inverter or a string inverter, how much number of modules, or some very brief key component of the system, and how it is evacuating power at what voltage levels. So these things are part of your system description, which is to be explained. Here, if you have any exemption, for example, in case of rooftop solar, if you are you want to make it very clear that you are not providing a power backup arrangement or any other detail, you can provide the exemptions in the PPA. Now coming to the contract terms which are commercial in nature. So typically it is a take or pay contract. Whatever electricity a solar developer generates, okay, this all electricity needs to be consumed by the off-taker. If grid is not available, the power will not be generated, and those things also come into play. But the contract is typically take or pay. I will generate. If you are not able to consume, then also you have to pay me. The tenure of PPA plays a very important role, wherein typically the tenure is about 25 or 20 years. It cannot be more than 25 years because 25 years is typically life of your solar panels. At times, the off-taker wants your solar PPA to be 10 year or 15 year. They would want that you generate electricity, you take your all profits, and then you move out and they own those assets. And those assets are bought at some X price by the off-taker. So the life of the project is 25 year, but if the project tenure is 10 year or 15 year, means after partially completing the life, the developer exits and hands over the assets to the off-taker at a X price. So that is the importance of the PPA tenure. If the PPA tenure is lesser, the tariff will be more because the developer has to take out his investments in a shorter period of time. So generally the tariff becomes higher. Then coming to the tariff. So tariff decides that at what rate the developer is going to sell the electricity to the off-taker. And the tariff is defined in kWh basis, like 5 rupees or 4 rupees per unit of electricity. So that plays a very important role because this is the number which is going to decide your cash inflow. So tariff is very most important part rather of the power purchase agreement. The PPA is also defining the payment terms. Typically, you raise the invoice and the invoice should be repaid by the developer within 15 days. If the developer do not pay the PPA based clause that if he fails to pay the invoice payment of monthly electricity sale within 15 days, then there is a penalty clause also for failing that, and that attracts an interest of typically 1% per month of the electricity, whatever outstanding bills. At times, you are having the payment security requirements, which is also a very important aspect from the banks and financial institutions. So what if the off-taker fails to pay you back? If you are raising invoice and the off-taker is not paying you, so what are the payment securities? So typically, developer asks the payment security from the off-taker. This payment security can be in the form of a fixed capital investment in the project or a deposit to the developer without interest. So it can be interest-free deposit, or in the form of a bank guarantee, which is for the tenure, or in the form of a letter of credit, LC, opened for 2 to 6 months, and this is a revolving letter of credit so that you get the payment. So the moment you raise your invoice, if developer do not pay, if the off-taker do not pay, then you get payment through the LC. And LC, if it is open, it is a revolving LC, so it is maintained throughout the PPA tenure. So those are the mechanism for payment security: a bank guarantee or a cash deposit, advance payment, or in the form of a letter of credit. So these are the payment security options the developer has. One more important term is the transfer of properties. So how do you transfer your assets? So as we discussed that if the PPA is for 25 years, then there is no residual life of the assets. But if the PPA is 10 years, 15 years or 20 years, then there is a residual life associated with the project. If you are not taking any advance payment, then you can define in your PPA that this is what going to be the end value of your projects. At times in PPA, you define the year-wise value of your assets. So in whichever year the PPA is terminated or PPA is ending, at that point, if there is an asset value, so that defines the buyback value for the off-taker. And at that price, the off-taker, if he has signed a PPA for 25 years, and if you want to buy the assets after 15 years, it is possible. So those things are the conditions related to transfer of properties. At times, the buyback happens even at 1 rupees of the overall project cost. So those are the things. Otherwise, you can also define like, okay, at the end of the life, you will be charging this much. If there is 25 years, then there might be a situation wherein the off-taker says that you have to remove your assets from the occupied areas. So those are the typical terms which come as part of transfer of properties. Now, here comes two more terms. There is a responsibility of the developer, and the second term is the responsibility of the off-taker. The responsibility of developer, let us discuss first that. The responsibility of the developer is that he has to install the system in a specified time. I have signed a PPA, but I'm taking too long to install, then it is a loss to the guy. So you have to define that what is your going to be the timeline, in how much time you will install. And if you fail or if you default on your timeline, then there can be some penalties associated to the execution of the project. The second aspect is, if I have installed the project and I am operating the project, but if I am not able to meet the minimum generation requirements, then it is a loss to the off-taker, because in that case, he has to buy a costlier electricity from grid or any other source. So in that type of scenario, what you do is that you are giving the right that if I am not able to produce electricity minimum, for example, in case of a per megawatt basis, you have given a net energy generation, NEGG, net energy generation guarantee. That is for 14 lakh units per megawatt per year. And if you fail, and if you are generating some 13 lakh units per year, then 1 lakh unit is the shortfall. And if your PPA is at 5 rupees, the developer has to buy a costlier electricity of 6 rupees. That means 1 rupees delta you have to pay back to the compensation, as a compensation to the off-taker. So these are the limitations or responsibilities of the developer. 1, execution in the time. 2, maintain the project and maintain the net energy generation. Now, coming to the off-takers, some more responsibility is that he has to pay the bill. And monthly, if I am generating my invoices, within 15 days of that, he has to provide me the payment of my invoiced electricity. So that becomes a very important aspect as part of responsibility of the off-taker. One more responsibility we should not forget is, if it is revolving letter of credit, then he has to maintain the letter of credit throughout the PPA duration. So these are typical, requirements. One more requirement is of the PPA term is the deemed generation. So if I'm generating, as I told that the solar PPA is a take or pay contract. If I'm generating and you are not able to consume my electricity, then my electricity I'm getting lost, because I get paid once I you consume. And if you don't consume something, then it will not be generated. If it is not generated, then how do I account? So let us say that one fine day your factory is off and I am generating electricity, but you are not able to consume due to any of the reason because you don't have the load requirement at that period. And in a day, suppose I have generated 5,000 units from a 1 megawatt solar power plant, then I would claim those 5,000 units as part of my deemed generation. Look, boss, I would have generated this. It is not generated, but it would have been generated if you were available for consuming that electricity. My system was available, but you did not consume. And that clause is known as deemed generation clause. Very important clause from the developer point of view. At times, this clause lead to a lot of disputes between the developer and off-taker. So it is very important to explain this clause to all the guys. Now, coming to some more clause that you have some default and timelines. So what are the client defaults? We also discussed the client default, that means the off-taker's default. If he is not paying your payments in time, okay, that can be first record. Then he has to maintain the guarantees or revolving letter of credit. That is the second part. If he defaults on any of them, then this is known as default from the off-taker or from the client. The developer's default include if he is not able to generate minimum amount of energy which he has guaranteed in the power purchase agreement. The second default is that if he has not commissioned timely the project, then also it is known as developer's default. The third aspect is that it's okay, he has commissioned it, he is not able to generate, but if he fails as a company, then what happens? So he has to maintain all the regulatory approvals, and those things are also part of developer's default. Every agreement has a termination clause. So the termination clause of a solar power purchase agreement also plays a very important role. You can do the premature termination of the PPA. Otherwise, PPA is naturally terminated at the end of the useful life or PPA tenure. So if you are having a PPA of 15 years, after completion of 15 years, the PPA will be automatically terminated. If you want to buy back the assets and want to terminate the PPA after 10 years, it is possible. There is a table defined at the end of the PPA, which is defining that how PPA termination clause will define the asset values. So the PPA termination plays a very important issue. The other clauses are confidential, which are a typical, clauses or the approvals or clearances or governing laws and regulations. The exclusivity, because you have signed the PPA, so you cannot sign the same requirement with somebody else. So these are the typical, including force majeure. If we pass through all COVID-related issues, and that period, the force majeure clause also came into picture. Otherwise, not many people used to even read properly those clauses. So these are the important aspects of a solar PPA. Let us do a recap of all this. We discussed that there is a off-taker, which is buyer of the electricity, and there is a developer. They sign this document, which is known as power purchase agreement. Once they sign the PPA, this becomes a binding condition to execute the project, and this PPA document becomes a banking or financing requirement main document, which is defining. We also discussed if the developer, what type of default developers can do as part of PPA, what type of defaults off-taker can do, what price the PPA is defining, how the tariffs is defining, and how the termination and other clauses we discussed. Please go through the full PPA. We are providing a copy of full PPA also to you. It's a 30-page document and very important document to those guys who are in the financing part. I'm sure that this will lead a good understanding about your bankability and financing requirement of solar project, whether it is a rooftop project or a ground mounted project. All these clauses are basic clauses. You have some detailed clauses also. So that is the reason you have to hire some consultant or expert or legal expert even to freeze down or vet your power purchase agreement. Thank you for this lecture.